Welcome back, everyone, to the DevOps track here at PyConline 2021. It's wonderful to have you all here, and we welcome our next speaker with a tremendous talk. It's Molly Rowe, who is here to talk about metrics for good, not evil. Molly, over to you.
Thank you. Hey there, everyone. My name is Molly. I'm here today to talk to you about metrics for good, not evil. Thank you for coming to my talk. So I'm the head of people and culture for Record Point. I have a pretty weird background, particularly compared to a lot of the other people who are talking at PyCon this weekend. I've been a scientist, a project manager, a Scrum lead, a hybrid cloud consultant, a recruiter, a manager, and now this head of people and culture role. I've spent the last 7 or so years trying to solve the pain points that plague so many tech companies using people-centric solutions. So a combination of tooling, technology, metrics, and empathy. Over the last 7 years, I've kind of run about almost 1,000 interviews globally for engineering, SRE, and DevOps roles. And in every single one of those, I've been asking the candidates, what kind of company do you want to work for? And then taking that data back and trying to make that a reality. So I kind of use this constant influx of user feedback to iterate on my idea of what engineers want and what businesses need and the complexity of the problem that separates those two things. And kind of off the back of that, I've built this role at Record Point. For any of those who haven't heard of us, we're a software as a service software engineering company that produces a federated information management product. We try to reduce the cost and the risk and the manual effort associated with going through data and records management audits. We're a scale-up of about 75 people globally, and 40 to 45 of those are software engineers and SREs. This means that a big chunk of my staff are engineers, and that plays a big role in my employee engagement, the overall culture of the business, and our retention rates. So everything that I can do to improve the processes and remove the pain points and improve the developer experience is a benefit to the whole business, which is why I care about SLOs. So Rekka Point has gone through over the past several years a pretty common experience that I've seen across multiple different software engineering companies, where we've had a shifting power balance between our engineering department and our product department. We've had leadership transitions that have meant that there's been kind of rapid changes in technical direction, as well as changes in overall delivery focus. And even though both sides of that coin, both product and engineering, have had their time in the sun, had their control, it hasn't really benefited anyone. So until you find a balanced approach where those two factions are working, if not in harmony, at least in concert, you're going to have struggles. So I kind of went out to the market and looked for a magic wand for how to solve this opposition nature that you see in so many software engineering businesses between product and engineering. And I wanted to know where I could find one. And like most things in life, I found that in Google. In this case, actually in Google. So Google's development of the SRE handbook and the incredible documentation around SLOs, SLAs, and SLIs has kind of led me down this rabbit hole of telemetry and visualization and metrics that have taught me about finding a common language of care within that dynamic and the care for the user. So a common complaint that I come across from engineers is that product management are changing the priorities too often, and work never gets fully completed, or the work that gets time of day is always feature development work and never platform or systems improvements. And the reciprocal complaint comes out of product. You know, we're not delivering client value, services being interrupted by issues and bugs and crappy code and unreliable platforms. And this rhetoric, justified or not, from both sides is kind of founded in the fact that those teams are incentivized differently. Product is often measured on delivery of SKUs rather than overall customer experience. And engineers measured on so many things, right? Features shipped, deployment frequency, velocity. And this really often leaves SRE holding the bag. They're responsible for the platform availability and the latency and the mean time to resolve whenever something goes wrong. But all of those metrics are heavily influenced by not only the priorities that come out of engineering and product, but also the work that's done by those two teams. And this is where the power of data comes in. And this is where the role of SRE into the future comes in. Because SRE are holding the keys to the kingdom when it comes to data and being able to create a common language between those two factions. For some organizations, those keys are still under construction, and that's okay because all the raw materials are still there. All of the raw materials and all of the raw data exists within your services today, and the future is about how you use it. I personally have quite an obsession with metrics and data in general, and a belief that until something's measured, it can't really be improved, at least not on purpose. Generally, and look, I'll admit this, talking about metrics will lose the attention of the audience and cause people's eyes to glaze over. I know that, but it's actually because most people have a pretty crappy experience with metrics. Almost all of us have sat down in a meeting or a retro and gone through the data and gone, yeah, but that's not right because X. And we all end up going down this justification or explanation pathway of why that data is incorrect that even to our own ears feels like excuses. And that's not our fault. This is because in general, people are really terrible at setting metrics, and we often default to setting metrics that address a symptom of a problem rather than a root cause. So let me tell you a quick story about metrics gone wrong. Back in the days of colonially occupied India, the British governor was concerned with the number of venomous cobras in the streets of Delhi. He decided to implement a scheme offering cash rewards for cobra heads. So basically, he equated dead snakes equals less snakes in the street. Seems okay on the surface. Initially, the scheme seemed to be successful. They were redeeming, or lots of people were redeeming the cash prize. And, assuming that this continues on track, the number of snakes in the street was, surely going to decrease. However, over time, that didn't happen. And they were trying to figure out why. So upon investigation, what they found was that some very innovative individuals and then all of their enterprising neighbors had started farming cobras. Yeah. They basically started farming these cobras with the full intent to kill them and then redeem them for the cash prize. In a rage, the governor cancelled the scheme and said, "This is not in the spirit of what we intended. I was trying to protect you. No more money for snakes." And so what you then have is a populace who have snake farms in their houses and backyards who no longer have an incentive to do so, to keep those snakes. And so they did the easiest and most predictable thing and let the snakes go into the streets. So with a well-meaning, well-intentioned scheme to reduce the number of venomous cobras and protect the population, the actual result was that by several orders of magnitude, they increased the number of snakes in the streets in Delhi. This law of unintended consequences has come to be known as the Cobra Effect. It's so eponymous with this scenario that I've just described. And, you might be tempted to say, look, Molly, that was 200 years ago in colonial India. This is not a great example. People wouldn't do anything quite so stupid anymore. Well, the most recent entry into the Cobra Effect Hall of Fame is, it goes to the university in the USA, who recently had to release a statement that said, "To any students who have voluntarily exposed themselves to COVID-19, if you continue, or to any students who have done that, you run the risk of being suspended or expelled." They had to release this statement because the local plasma donation centre had increased the money reward for donating plasma for anyone who had active COVID-19 antibodies, so someone who had had COVID, to more than $100 per donation. The scheme was completely well-intentioned. They were trying to treat people who were in critical care with COVID, which is a use of plasma, and instead what they created was more people in critical care with COVID in that area. So this is me circling back to why most people have a terrible traditional experience with metrics. Humans are pretty bad at using critical analysis when it comes to incentives and are rarely just looking for an empirical outcome. Like, you should rarely be looking for an empirical outcome. You're often trying to actually influence the behaviors that drive that outcome. You're not really looking for snakeheads, I hope. You're actually looking for less snakes. You're not really looking for more test coverage. You're looking for better code. So when you're proxying the behavior that you want with an easy to measure symptom, this is a common downfall of general metrics. It's pretty much just a case of be careful what you wish for. There's a couple of easy ways to counteract a lot of these pitfalls that go beyond imagine how you would game the system. Because people are infinitely resourceful, particularly when you incentivize them to be so. Pretty much everyone should be familiar with this cost, speed, quality trade-off triangle. And this is actually a great way to build metrics because you should have metrics that contradict each other. What that allows you to do is create a balance where to exceed or to game a metric or to push one metric really hard, you're going to influence those other metrics to their detriment and therefore have an overall worse outcome than if you hadn't tried to game that singular metric. A really great example of this is Nicole Forsgren's metrics for high-performing teams. She outlines these in her book Accelerate, which I highly recommend you read. But basically the premise is that lead time, deployment frequency, change fail ratio, and mean time to resolve are metrics that are indicators of high-performing teams. Lead time and deployment frequency obviously correlate to speed, and change fail ratio and mean time to resolve obviously correlate to quality or reliability. Sorry, thank you. And so, if you're trying to optimize for your change fail ratio and, you're trying to push out perfect code that has no bugs, you're going to impact your lead time and your deployment frequency negatively. These are the kind of principles that led me to the investigation of SLOs, right? The new problem is, how do we define metrics that encompass the whole product and incentivize good behaviors between competing elements? It starts with kind of finding that balance of power between two factions. So no longer talking about speed and quality or reliability, but now talking about product and engineering as the business kind of equivalents of those things. The thing that's often kind of missing when you do have two powerful factions vying for control is an impartial arbiter, particularly when those factions have different objectives and they're being measured differently. So the role of SRE, that's where we come in. So SRE owning the data across the business and being able to provide a common language and a common thread of discussion between those two factions with data to back it up becomes a new way forward. The role of SRE as defined by Google is responsible for so many pieces of data. So they're responsible for the availability, the latency, the performance, the efficiency, the change management, monitoring, emergency response, capacity planning of all of their services. And this places SRE in this pivotal area of control as the provider and the purveyor of data. If we rephrase this balance again, but now in terms of SRE as the middleman, providing a common language that impacts both product and engineering, we're now talking about speed and reliability again, but where we have SLOs or any kind of metric to come in and bridge the gap and provide a quantifiable answer to what is important at any given time and why, as well as that common language to how to productively discuss it in a way that we're bringing logic and data into what is often a very emotional exchange. So expectations from users around features, reliability, availability, security, and quality are all increasing exponentially, right? But most organizations are making trade-offs and are not really set up to deliver on all of these vectors, which is the speed and reliability compromise that we've been talking about, because it really is fundamentally underlying the conflict between engineering and product. On one axis, there's this desire and need to have rock-solid stability and reliability. But the challenge is, if that's what you're optimizing for, you're not innovating to your full potential. And you're going to have issues within the market, if not now, in the future. And on the other hand, you can't spend all of your time pushing for feature delivery without regard to stability, or you'll rapidly accrue risk and technical debt and potentially churn your existing customers. So what I haven't defined for you, and I want to touch on really briefly, is what are SLAs, SLOs, and SLIs. This all comes straight from the Google handbook, SRE handbook. Please, I encourage you to read it. It is much more thrilling than it sounds. But SLOs, SLIs, and SLAs are exclusively used as metrics that capture parts of your user journey, such as availability or request latency or throughput or error rate. They give you a metric for both sides of that coin, like the coin of product versus engineering, if you assume that both engineering and product care about your user, which I hope they do. So your SLA is your service level agreement. It's your external metric to which your business has committed to legally and with generally a monetary obligation to meet. This is often something reasonable, but after which it's the kind of the baseline after which your clients are not happy with their service. Your SLO is your service level objective. It is the internal target for the metric that you're measuring that should represent where your client starts to feel pain. It represents your optimal point where you want to hit from a reliability versus speed perspective, or a reliability versus risk perspective. And your SLI is your service level indicator. It's the measure of service reliability. It's what you're measuring. SLIs will tell you that something is wrong, and you need to use all of your other metrics to figure out what that is. So this is a good depiction of how this works, right? So your agreement is just enough to stop your customer being unhappy or leaving or churning. That's what they've agreed to as an acceptable level. Your objective, your SLO, has to be tighter than that agreement, and it should represent your desired user experience. Breaching your objective has to have consequences as well. You shouldn't just be only if we breach the SLA is there a problem. Breaching your objective is where you need to be able to leverage that data within the business to change priorities of what's being worked on, because you're heading in the wrong direction, and it allows you to be proactive before there is a monetary problem where you're impacting your SLA. Anything above your SLO means that you're spending too much time on reliability and you're wasting effort that could be used to deliver features. So anything better than your SLO is wasted effort. Very quickly about error budgets. Error budgets is the next stage in this scenario, where an error budget is monitoring your SLO over time. If your SLO, as in the previous slide, is 99.95% availability, then your error budget would be 1 minus your SLO, 0.05%. This means that if you map that out over the month, 0.05% of the minutes in the month gives you 22 minutes. SRE practices encourage you to strategically burn that budget to zero on purpose to do things like deliver new features, run expected systems changes, use planned downtime, or just do a slightly risky experiment. It means that if you're hitting or using your error budget, you're running as fast as you possibly can without impacting your availability and without impacting your client. Error budgets are not something you need to do right away. If you're investigating SLOs for your own business, start at the start. Start with SLOs and SLIs and setting those metrics and starting to measure them and make sure they're the right thing. Error budgets are things for down the track. They don't have to be something that you start with. You don't have to go all out right away. So Martin Fowler very famously, 2018, said, evidence refutes the bimodal IT notion that you have to choose between speed and stability. Instead, speed depends on stability, so good IT practice gives you both. So what does good IT practice actually look like, and how does data and SLOs and all of the things that I've talked about, implementation of SRE within a business, how does that get you there? Using your metrics for good starts with what are you trying to get out of them? So common language, SLOs provide you with that common language between product and engineering of how do you talk about what is important. And what is important should almost always be your customer. You also now have hard data to influence that. As I said previously, like quite emotional decision. Product and engineering are often rewarded and incentivized on the metrics that they as individual departments care about rather than that centralized core component of the client. So having hard data that backs up that work needs to happen to stabilize the product is really important. It also allows you to be proactive. You know when things are trending in a bad direction, where you're going to breach an SLO or an SLA. You also know that you can be proactively releasing innovative pieces of work because you're consuming your error budget to do so. And the justification piece is really about how you have that productive discussion. So having SLOs in place for your production services allows you to remove all of that emotional ambiguity when it comes to figuring out the impact of an unplanned change or outage. Businesses often refuse to invest in availability or reliability until the bottom line's impacted. So it's really important to have that data to back up what you're trying to say. This is where SRE comes in as a whole, and the role of SRE may change going forward in the future, at least from kind of what I understand behind it. Initiatives like SLOs can be really difficult to get buy-in for, and the owner to kick off really has to be the SRE team. But it can't be them in isolation. You know, you're talking about metrics of what impacts the clients and what the clients or the customers care about, which means that you need to be involved with your product owners, with your customers themselves, or with your customer success teams, as well as your engineers who have to do the work to make sure that we're hitting those SLOs, because your SLOs shouldn't be aspirational. They need to be something that you can achieve. There are lots of selling points behind SLOs as a program, but in general, the ability to surface your technical debt related to reliability or lack thereof means that you can advocate for what you need in terms of allocation of engineering resources. You're reducing your manual effort from an SRE perspective of generating this data. You know what you're going to talk about. You know what you're going to review. You know what the metrics are and what we care about. And as I said, you're also reducing your risk around monetary risk to the business. So this is how you sell it into the business, is reducing that monetary risk or risk of churn by improving your customer satisfaction rates. These are not for everyone. I'm not trying to say that SLOs or SLIs or SLAs, any of those things are for every business. There is a level of maturity, particularly in the businesses that have actually already implemented this to great success, the Googles, the Evernotes, the Twitters. Those guys are huge. You don't have to start there. You don't have to look at them and go, this is this huge unachievable mountain. You can start with 2 to 3 SLOs and iterate and work your way up. You can start to build out that team, or you can build it internally as a proof of concept within your SRE team and then start to use the quality and the relevance of the data that you're producing to get buy-in from other pieces of the business as well and drive that adoption. Failure's gonna happen. Like, this is the DevOps track. You guys have been listening to failure and learnings and amazing triumphs through that all day. As you implement these kinds of things, failures are going to occur, SLOs are going to be breached, systems are made by humans, and we've already discussed in quite a bit of detail how humans are imperfect. So what's important is learning from these and continuing to iterate on your SLOs. You should be going back and looking at them on a regular cadence to make sure that they're reflecting the things that you want or the things that the clients still want. And you have to be collaborative in this iteration as well. You have to incorporate those other parts of the business that have those touch points with the clients, as well as the ones that pay the bills, to make sure that you're delivering not just for yourself and your department, but also for the whole business. The other piece to all of this, right, is the blameless mentality and how important it is, because you're not going to get it right straight away, or even continuously. What the clients want is going to change. But nothing's about who tripped over the power cord, but how do we stop people from tripping over the power cord next time? SLOs should never, ever, ever be tied to individual performance metrics. They need to be the goal the goal should always be defining more SLOs to get greater visibility and understanding, rather than blaming teams for not meeting SLOs. Your SLOs are meant to be a way to empower the discussion of what needs to happen next and what went wrong and how we fix it in the future. I just want to circle quickly back to Martin Fowler's idea of good IT practices and bridging the gap between speed and quality. So Rekka, my company, is still in its infancy when it comes to implementing any of these SLOs, SLIs, SLAs. And I came to talk to you today about the research that I'd done in the hopes that other people had seen these problems in their own organizations and found this something interesting, as a way to bridge that gap and go forward. SLOs are a great way to start leveraging your existing data and setting metrics that really mean something both to your customer and to your product, and addressing a root cause rather than just symptoms. And the more research that I dive into of this side of SRE and its potential role as the collector and the curator of data and acting as a mediator between the two factions within the business, means that they get to be an impartial driver for the great customer experience. And the more I believe that even if this isn't the final answer, I think it's a really good step forward for technology in general and the way that our businesses need to continue to move forward. I'm certainly not trying to say that SLOs will solve any problem or even that they're right for every business. But I am trying to say that this framework is something that I see as a potential balm for the pain that I have seen across so many businesses globally, and every day in my own business. It's highly likely that I'll be back here next year for the "We tried this and this is what we learnt" Metrics for Good, Not Evil Part 2. And we can definitely go over the blooper reel then. But I hope that this has been a bit of an inspiration to do your own research and explore if this might be a good solution to your problems. Thank you so much for your time. I know this is not a normal talk, even for this track, but it's something that I really wanted to share. And if you've got your own horror stories or success stories for implementing SLOs in your business, I'd love to hear them. Please hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. And if you got nothing else out of this talk, please remember that whatever else you do, don't put bounties on snakeheads.
Thank you, Dawn. That has been a tremendous talk. Thank you. Sorry, Molly. What am I saying? Dawn. I have my next talk already queued up in my head. Excellent. More failure for the DevOps track. My apologies, Molly.
No worries.
Metrics close to my heart, though. I love everything that you were talking about there. People in the chat also really got a lot out of that. We have a couple of questions already queued up. So if you could jump into the chat and talk to people about those questions, either just in the chat for the room itself or into the hallway track, that would be superb. People would love to talk to you some more.
All right, no worries. I'll jump in now. Thank you.
Great. And we have another short break now. We'll be back in 15 minutes for our final talk of the day, which is by Dawn this time. Getting people's names right is important, which is about accessibility overlays, a cautionary tale. I wonder what the cautionary tale will be. And yes, so grab a quick drink, ask some questions about Molly's talk there about metrics, and we will see you back here in about 15 minutes.